Hi everyone, welcome to this week. We're going to learn perfect passives. If you last 2 weeks we've learned passives, future passives, etc. So we're going to learn perfect passives this week. So speaking of which, just another review of those present passives or present stem passives. So that includes both the present, the imperfect, and the future. And again, these are the personal endings for those passives. And same with the active, it uses those characteristic vowels, and just to see the pronouns down here. For the perfect passives, we're going to shift into the third and fourth principal part, and this little diagram kind of shows how the principal parts work in general. So for present, imperfect, and future, both active and passive, the first and second principal part to some extent are combined, right? The first principal part is a form that is derived from the second principal part and is similar to the other forms of those tenses and voices. So all 6 of those tense and voice combos, present, active, passive, imperfect, active, passive, future, active, passive, ultimately come from the second principal part, and that, of course, is where the present stem comes from, and we of course use that to build all of those forms. So this line here, this solid line, kind of makes that divide. So on the left you've got the first and second principal parts, which deal with those tenses and voices. On the right you've got third and fourth principal parts, which deal with the perfect tenses, so perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. Now the big difference here is, and we talked about this when we learned the active forms of the perfect tenses, is that the third principal part is only for active forms. All right. Along those lines, the fourth principal part is only going to be for passive forms, and that's what this little dotted line does, is that there's a little subdivision between third and fourth principal part. So we've learned the third principal part, we've learned the perfect stem, and how the active forms are formed. This week we're going to learn the passive forms, and those are going to come from the fourth principal part. So just keep in mind how the principal parts work. It can help you kind of organize things in your head. Excuse me. So remember that we're dealing with the 3 perfect tenses: perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. And each of those tenses is going to use the fourth principal part, all right, and then some form of the verb to be, and that form will change based on whatever tense you want. And this is a separate word. So you might remember from the active, the pluperfect and the future perfect used forms of the verb to be, or forms similar to forms of the verb to be in the future perfect tense's case for some forms, as endings. For the passive forms, they're going to be separate words. So you can see some examples here. All right, so you can see that we saw, or we sus, we saw, we see, we sigh. Those are all forms of the fourth principal part. And then you have the form of the verb to be after it. Okay, so puer we sus est, the boy was seen. Puella we sa est, the girl was seen. Pueri we si sunt, the boys were seen. Puellae we si sunt, the girls were seen. Okay, so that is the basic formula for forming the perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect passive, and we'll take a look at each of those in a little more depth as we go through. I'd point out that there is a formula to what the form of the verb to be is. The perfect uses the present of the verb to be, the pluperfect uses the imperfect of the verb to be, and the future perfect uses the future of the verb to be. All right, and you can see those in those underlined forms and the non-underlined forms. Sumus est, sumus est sunt. That's the present of the verb to be. Arama rasa rat, aramas aratus arant. That's the imperfect of the verb to be. And aroaris arit, arimus aritus arunt. That is the future of the verb to be. Okay. The final thing I'll point out is that fourth principal part is a participle, the perfect passive participle, and as a participle, it is an adjective. A participle, remember, is a verb that functions like an adjective. And so what that means is its ending is going to change based on the subject. So you can see in the examples here that those are 4 different endings, because there are 4 different subjects. So the first one, us, is masculine singular because puer is masculine singular. The second one, a, is feminine singular because puella is feminine singular. The third one, we see, e, is masculine plural because pueri is masculine plural. And the fourth one, that ae ending, is feminine plural because puellae is feminine plural. Those will only be nominative. They will not use the other cases when they're used in these perfect passive forms. but they will change based on the subject. They will agree with the subject, whatever the subject is, masculine, feminine, neuter, singular, plural, etc. So here is the perfect passive, excuse me, all done out. You can read the kind of general info over on this end all the way down. I'm not going to go through all of it for you, but you can see with an example verb that here is our fourth principal part, and then our forms of the verb to be. You can also see how the ending changes from a single A to AE, singular A, to plural AE, as you go into the plural column. And just to remind you, I should say, this is porto, portare, portavi, portatus. Excuse me. So portatus is the fourth principal part. Of course, we're dealing with a feminine subject here. That's why it's A and AE. All right, but that is another example of that participle changing to agree with its subject. Then down here, you have all the conjugations done out with principal parts so you can see. All right, and I just highlight the translation. So was or were verbed, has or have been verbed, has been verb. The been goes with the has as well. Okay, so in other words, portata est, she was carried, she has been carried. Portatai sunt, they were carried, they, feminine, were carried. Okay, so remember in English the passive is often, and I want to say always, but I don't like to say always because there are usually exceptions. So let's say often, but I probably mean always. The participle, the English participle, that's the carried part, and then some form of the verb to be, right? So was carried, there's my form of the verb to be, and then the participle carried. Have been carried. Carried, of course, the participle, and the been is the form of the verb to be. Have, of course, is not. All right, shifting to the pluperfect. So same exact thing, it's just the forms of the verb to be now are the imperfect rather than the present. Okay? And again, you've got all your conjugations done out here. So the pluperfect is had been verbed. And remember, the active is just had verbed, right? And the passive becomes had been verbed, that been making it passive. Remember, too, that the passive, in a passive sentence, I should say, the subject receives the action rather than does the action. So in an active sentence, the subject does the action. In a passive sentence, the subject receives the action. Okay. Otherwise, the formation is exactly the same. Translation is the same except for the had part that signals the pluperfect. All right, and here's the future perfect. Certainly not very commonly used, the future perfect passive, but here it is done out for you. Again, everything is the same except for the forms of the verb to be, and the translation is that will have been verbed. Again, the active is will have verbed. The passive is will have been verbed, with that been thrown in to make it passive. All right, so I just want you to see this again. I'm not going to mark it up, but hopefully it makes a little more sense or seems a little clearer now that you've seen the passive forms in action. The main thing to remember is once you shift into the third and fourth principal parts, each of them is responsible for a separate voice. So third principal part active only, fourth principal part passive only. All right, so here are some exercises. We're just forming the perfect passive indicative. All right, based on the verb, obviously, and then the subject is in parentheses. The AI is going to be they, feminine plural. The AI is going to be, or AI, I should say, she. All right, this is going to be they, masculine plural. All right, and this is going to be another they, feminine plural. Remember, is he. All right. All right, so I'll do some down the bottom because I think some of the answers will be coming for some of the ones at the top. All right, so the fourth one's part of relinquo is relictus. So relictus est. Separate word, all right, that us is because the subject is feminine. And this was he was abandoned or left behind. All right, you are going to have to look up the principal parts if you don't know them. If I go to the next one up, number 9, all right, so in ken sai sunt, because it's plural. All right, note the participle changes, AE, and the verb to be is plural. So they were burned. All right, and some of these are somewhat straightforward, excuse me, because the endings are the same, but remember that the endings won't always be the same. For number 10, let's say it was the king was abandoned, right? I'm just going to draw on the exercise here. Rex relictus Right, rex is still masculine singular. Relictus as an us adjective has to use that us for the masculine singular, even though rex doesn't use that for its masculine singular. So you will have some ending difference depending on the declension of the noun. All right, here come the answers. So pause if you want or go back. All right, and there is 1 to 4 done out. Excuse me. All right, so now we're just identifying the forms as perfect or pluperfect. Remember that had is always pluperfect, but students sometimes kind of just mix up have, had, has in their mind. So have or has is always perfect. Had is always pluperfect. All right, and so just note that if there's more than one verb, all right, more than one blank will be provided. So had been drained, all right, that is going to be pluperfect. All right, were fought is going to be perfect. Had abandoned is going to be pluperfect. All right, and then have been imitated. Sorry, there's a thing that I can't underline underneath. All right, that is going to be perfect. All right, so just to point out, had pluperfect. All right, have perfect. All right, and then were is going to be perfect, and of course had pluperfect as well. I point out as well that had abandoned is active, but it's still, of course, a pluperfect with that had. All right, same thing. Pause if you want. Here come the answers. All right, there we go. All right, so now we're just translating the verbs into English. These are all, excuse me, these are all pluperfect. All right, so fractus aram, I had been broken. All right, ran out of room here. Spectati aramus, we had been looked at. All right, and note how with all of these forms, you're kind of just building them as you go, right? So we is our subject, then had been is our pluperfect passive. You could say had is the pluperfect, and then been makes it passive. Looked is the spectati, or looked at, I should say, is the spectati, and you go from there. All right, same thing. Here come the answers. All right, there we go. All right, so now we're going English to Latin, excuse me, and we have all different tenses, okay? So it's not just one tense. So number 10, we had been left behind. Had, of course, is the pluperfect, so nos, which is optional, but I'll put it there anyway. Remember that relictus is the fourth one's part of to leave behind, relinquo. Now it's going to be plural, so it's going to be relicti or relicti, depending on whether the we is masculine or feminine. All right, and then pluperfect needs the imperfect of the verb to be, with, of course, the we ending, and that is eramos. So relicti or relicti, eramos. All right, and number 9, sorry about that, it should be illy. So illy, weary. All right, or I could just say illy, the weary can be understood. Visus is the fourth one's part of video. So we see, and then were makes it perfect. So I want the present of the verb to be, so we see sunt. Excuse me. And again, plural masculine this time because of weary, so that's why it's we see sunt. All right, here come the answers. Pause. All right, and there they are. All right, so let's take a look at the summatives. All right, so you're identifying the verbs by person, number, and tense, and then you're translating them. All right, so in incensum est, so third person singular, and it's perfect. All right, so the est gives me the third singular, and the est with that fourth one's part gives me the perfect. All right, and so translated, it was or has been burned. All right, and note that um tells me that it's it because um is neuter. If it were he was burned, it would have to be incensus est. She was burned, incensa est. All right, number 2, so first person plural, and it's future perfect because of that eremus. So we will have been heard. All right, it's a bit of a complicated one, or at least a lot of words, but note that the will have been just kind of builds our future perfect, right? Will makes it future, have makes it perfect, been makes it passive. All right, I'll leave the rest for you. Here is the writing, all right, and I give you the principal parts so you can kind of have them right there. No reason not to get the principal parts correct. All right, so they will have been heard. Again, just as we said, that's future perfect. All right, so dt. I think I put an extra I in there. Sorry about that. dt, so that's the they, plural with the E. All right, and then, of course, the heard part. And then erunt makes it future perfect. All right. They will have heard the next one. All right, note that is no longer passive. So now I need to do the active. So audiwerent. All right, couple things. So one, I'm at the third principal part. That's what that IV is. You can see it there. All right, and then there's my third person plural future perfect active ending. Remember, it's erint in the active because they use erunt for the perfect active. So they use that INT sound they don't like particularly. All right, that is it for this week. Please email me if you have any questions, and I will be here next week. Thanks.